and Abe, then we'll start the meeting. Welcome to everybody.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cantor Matthew Austerklein. I'm the Cantor of Bethel congregation in Akron, Ohio, and I'm really honored to be introducing today and sharing the stories and reflections on an amazing cantorial career with my friend and colleague, Cantor Abe Lubin. I've felt a great kinship being back in his home country of the UK. I just got back from doing a term of research at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies, and I've gotten to meet a lot of the UK and European cantorial chevra, which generated this wonderful forum. So thank you to Geraldine and to Dr. Mark Kligman and to Dr. Lori Black and everyone, and Alex Klein and everyone who's brought this together. And so without further ado, it's my honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Cantor Abraham Lubin. So I'm going to read you his extensive bio, just to get a little more sense of his story, and then I'm going to ask him some questions. If you have questions for him, I actually am going to ask you to send them to Lori Black. You can direct them to Lori, and Lori at the end will get sort of the top big questions that we have and bring them to everybody to ask Abe, and then we'll have time at the end for a little more open in the last 15 minutes. So Cantor Abraham Lubin, who you see before you, was born in London. As a child, he returned with his parents to Israel, their birthplace. He's a fifth-generation Israeli. In 1950, his family returned to England, where he continued his education at the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in London, and then at the Jews College Cantorial School, where he graduated as a chazan. He also has received, over the course of his career, as associate degree at the London College of Music, the ALCM diploma, a Bachelor of Music degree from College Conservatory at the University of Cincinnati, a Master's in Music from DePaul University, an ABD from the University of Chicago, and a Doctor of Music degree honoris causa from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. At age 8, he began, probably maybe not the beginning, but he famously sang solos with the Rivlin Choir in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem. During his school years, Chazan Lubin sang in many leading synagogues in England and Scotland. At age 13, he conducted the services at leading synagogues in the area, and at age 15, sang his first High Holy Day service. At 17, he was the chazan at the Jubilee Street Zionist Synagogue in London, and at just 19, he became chazan at the Bayswater Synagogue in London, where he was inducted into office by Chief Rabbi Israel Brody. Chazan Lubin came to the USA in 1958, serving for 10 years with the Beth Abraham Synagogue in Dayton, Ohio. Then, beginning in 1968, he served as chazan at Congregation Rodbeit Tzedek and shortly at Anshe Emet Synagogue in Chicago. Since 1990, Chazan Lubin has served at Congregation Bethel in Bethesda, Maryland, and at the end of June 2011, he retired as chazan and became chazan emeritus. And I had the honor of meeting him as I succeeded him for 6 years in that position, and we became very good friends. So a little more about sort of the details of some of Abe's work. In 1987, Chazan Lubin served on a special 10-member fact-finding committee appointed by then Cantors Assembly President Saul Hammerman, alav shalom, to explore the ramifications for allowing women to become cantors, a decision which Cantor Lubin advocated for and which was reached shortly in the years thereafter. From 1995 till 1997, Cantor Lubin served as president of the Cantors Assembly. He has received many honors from the Assembly for his exemplary career and service, including the Yuval Award, the Sam Rosenbaum Award for Scholarship and Creativity, and the Saul Meisels Award for Chazanic Excellence. Lubin served as editor of the Journal of Synagogue Music and contributed articles on Jewish music in various periodicals, among them The Influence of Jewish Music and Thought in Certain Works of Leonard Bernstein. He contributed to Mark Slobin's 1989 book, Chosen Voices, The Story of the American Cantorate, and he served on the 5-member editorial committee for the 2002 edition of Sidur Sim Shalom for Weekdays for the conservative movement in America. Cantor Lubin has mentored cantors across the denominational spectrum, and it really is such a chazan to all of Am Yisrael, appearing in concert many times with Orthodox chazanim and traditional chazanim, as well as with many conservative and reform colleagues. This is not only because Abe has the highest level of artistic interpretation as a sacred singer, it is because he embodies the cantor's ideal of being murad b'dat im habriyot, being pleasant in the eyes of all human beings. So, given that what is just little signposts in an amazingly deep career, I'm sure you have 1,000 questions for Cantor Lubin. I do too. And I'm going to ask him just a few pointed ones on different parts of his career and get his comments on them, and then we'll open it up at the end. So, Chazan Lubin, tell me about, or tell all of us about, your Jewish musical influences as a child. You were a high holiday chazan by 15. So tell us what learning to daven and learning to be a chazan was like when you were learning.
Well, first, let me thank you, Matt, for introducing me like this. I'm humbled, and all I can say is, Hineni ha'ani mima'as. And secondly, my earliest introduction to Jewish music was my mother, Alea HaShalom, used to sing, and that is in Jerusalem, used to sing Yiddish and Hebrew songs. He had a beautiful, gorgeous voice, and I just picked up that naturally, and I'll never forget many of the songs, but one of them she would sing in Yiddish. Let's see how it goes. Koivche, koivche, koivche papirossen. That's a song in Yiddish that the little orphan kid is selling papirossen, cigarettes, and the song says, "Buy cigarettes for me and save an orphan from death." A beautiful song, and my mother, as I said, had a beautiful. But my father was a monotone, but my mother had a beautiful voice. So these were my earliest remembrances of singing and so forth. As you've already mentioned, I sang with Zalman Rivlin. Shirat Yisrael was the boys' choir in Jerusalem. And this Rivlin, of course, is related to the same Rivlin family, who is the president of Israel presently. What did you specifically ask me again? I already forgot. What did you say, Matt?
What was it like to learn to daven? And this is even before Jews College. What was it like to learn?
Sure.
Who were your mentors for davening?
Right.
Where did you hear davening?
Well, I had to daven, of course, with my father in Jerusalem and so forth. And I remember hearing a Bal Tfilah in one of the Shtiblach in Jerusalem where I lived. When people asked me where in Jerusalem did I live lived in a place called Beit Yisrael HaYeshana, which is, as I like to tell, a Shabbat stone's throw away from Mea Shearim. But I wasn't one of the kids throwing stones on Shabbos. Anyway, and I remember one of the refrains of this Bal Tfilah. I must have been maybe 8 or maybe something like that. And one of the nigunim went like this. It was a Bal Tfilah. He says, and here's what he's saying. Leif shoifchim, leif shoifchim, leif shoifchim, leif shoifchim, etc. You know, the pouring of the heart with the tears in the songs. So this, the earliest time that I remember, and I'm trying to think at that age in Jerusalem. Yes, one of the fun things that I used to do was to go to a kiosk immediately outside Mea Shearim. There was a kiosk, and the kiosk sold cigarettes, newspapers, mastica, chewing gum, and such like. But one service that it provided was, in lieu of a jukebox that we are familiar with in a diner, the person there, the owner, would provide anyone who would like to listen for a coin, for a pruta or whatever. They would make a request for a chazonische shtickle, from one of the recordings. And I couldn't afford that. So I stood nicely outside the store, and people would come in. Let's say, somebody would say, I would like to hear Tia Rabbi Shmuel Atzmoi by, that Kvarten sang. And so we would put the recording. I stood outside, I listened to it, and that's the way I absorbed many of the great chazonim of the past, from Pinchik to Rosenblatt to Kvarten to Cup of Kagan and so on. To think that that's what I did as a kid, if I tell the high school kids nowadays that I did that, they would say that's the best they could do. In other words, you think either I'm lying or I'm losing it, and that was 15, 20, 30 years ago, they would say that. But anyway, be that as it may, that was my love. I also, at the time, I was at the yeshiva, Tiferet Israel in Haifa. And one of the reasons I was in Tiferet Israel in Haifa, we are talking about pre-1948 establishment of the State of Israel. No, I'm not 110 years old, but I remember that my brother, my older brother David, Olav Shalom, and I went to the Tiferet Israel Yeshiva. The reason being that there wasn't room in the house. It was a very small apartment. My brother and I went to the yeshiva, so it was a boarding yeshiva, so to speak. And my older sister used to go to sleep every night at my grandparents' home, which was in Beit Bateim Garin, right there near Mea Sharim. And that was probably the reason why there wasn't room in the house, so they shipped us out. And anyway, these are my earliest remembrances. And in Haifa, of course, I went to the yeshiva and studied that. And I'm trying to think. Yes, and my older brother was a Baal Kriya there in some German synagogue, German Jewish synagogue in the Hadar Carmel, and made a few extra dollars at the time, a few extra lirot and so on. Those were my earliest. But then in London, when my family went to London in 1950, we moved in a neighborhood where I went to hear the chazan there in the Stoke Newington Synagogue. Charles, I think my good friend would know where it is. And I remember that I auditioned. They had a professional choir. I was about 13 and a half. And you had to audition for that choir, professional choir. I auditioned, and I got the job to be in the choir, and I got a solo. And for the solo, they paid me 5 shillings because I was in the choir and I got to sing the solo. And here is the solo that I still remember. I sang it, you can imagine, it was a large shul, and I sang the following solo. שחטאנו לפניך ואחרית שחטאנו לפניך ביודעים ובלא יודעים. Now I sing Belo Yodim Uvelo Yodim, but then I sang Belo Yodim Uvelo Yodim. Anyway, so these are my remembrances. And then I used to love to go, I walked a mile to hear a chazan on Shabbos, and the chazan that I heard was Ephraim Rosenberg, who was a wonderful, great chazan. And if you can imagine in those days, Erev Yontef on an evening or a Friday night, they would actually sing with the choir, boys and men's choir. They would sing the whole thing of I think it's Zedel Ravner's Emes Ve'emunah, and I used to love to hear that Ephraim Rosenberg. That was in the Stamford Hill Synagogue on Egerton Road. So these are my earliest remembrances. At home, we always had recordings of both Yiddish singers. One of the recordings I remember was by Yiddish singer, by Leo Fuld, who sang beautifully. I loved him. And of course, all the great Chazanim. Once again, Rosenblatt, Pinchik, Kvarten, Hirschman, and so forth. And that's where I picked up all that stuff. So the earliest piece that I used to remember, as I heard it from Pinchik, was of course Rosa de Shabbos, which is a classic of his and of Chazanut, and I've sung that hundreds of times since at concerts and other events. So I don't know how much more you want to hear about that. Anyway.
Thanks, Abe. Can you say a little more about when you went to Jews College? What was that experience like, coming from having already done your first high holidays? What was the training like? What was the experience of that school when you were there in the 50s?
At Jews College, of course, the main professor of Chazanut was Leo Bryll, who wrote some beautiful things and was quite a personality. And I remember some of the students there, and my experience there was, in addition to Chazonas that I studied, the Nusach and so forth, there were also a professor, what was his name, Francis Sutton, who taught us theory and so on, and harmony. And then there was a voice teacher by Howard Hughes, was his name, at Jews College. And I remember the other scholars with whom I studied, as amazing, was of course in Jews College was the principal there, as he was called, was Dr. Isidore Epstein, who was the editor of the Soncino Talmud. And one of the translators was Eli Kashdan. Eli Kashdan was a teacher of mine, and he translated one of the tractates of the Soncino Talmud. As well, there was a Professor Naftali Wieder. Naftali Vida was a great scholar on liturgy, and he was my teacher of liturgy. And then I was in the company of other scholars. For example, Louis Jacobs, whom I always would see in the library and the stacks studying, and those are some of the names. So I was very much inspired by the atmosphere of study, the library, scholarship, and sociability with a variety of students there, both those who went to study to be ministers and rabbis, and of course Chazanim as well.
Beautiful. Now, Abe, I'm going to ask you another question, but first I'm going to ask you, Abe has a very, very strong voice. So even for after 65 years in the Cantors, if you want to take about 3 feet back from the microphone, it's going to help us not have distortion. But again, it's because...
Let me do that. I've just adjusted it. Is this better now?
Oh, that's much better. That's
okay.
Much better.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So tell us a little about what informed your decision to emigrate to the United States, and what it was like getting your first job as a chazan in the U.S.
Okay, interesting is before that, I had a position at the Bayswater Synagogue, as you had mentioned, Matt, and that was actually held by Leo Bryll before me. So I succeeded him, my mentor, Leo Bryll, in his position in Bayswater Synagogue. And after a year, I was then as age 18, and then I decided that if I want to be a chazan, a grosser chazan, I wanted to brush shoulders with all the great chazonim who were in America, in the Golden Medina. And I'm glad that I did that, because unfortunately in England the chazanut and the positions and so on were not as did not evolve as I would have liked for them to have been. So I was glad to come to the States, and I arrived. I remember the date on a ship. It was July 8th, 1958. And I arrived there. And as I said, the reason was I wanted to be with the Chazonim and so forth. My first introduction was when I needed a job. It was already July, not far from Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. So I went to the Chazonim Verband office to see where they have placement, if I could get a job at least for the high holidays, right? Because I only had very few shillings in my pocket. I came in, and I hope, with all due respect to any Orthodox Chazonim of the time, some of whom are not alive anymore, but they were playing Pinnacle and were schmoozing and so on, and I didn't get any kind of a response. Anyway, so from there, why did I go there? Because I came from an Orthodox environment of the United Synagogue in England, in London, which is, of course, essentially Orthodox. And that was my first address. But then I very comfortably figured I'll go to the conservative office, which was held at the Jewish Theological Seminary. The Cantors Assembly had an office there. And I met there Morris Shaw, was a chazan, alav hashalom. He was handling the spit placement. And he said to me, I'd love to, direct you to a high holiday job, but first crack are those members of the Cantors Assembly. You'd have to be a member of the Cantors Assembly. So I said, maybe make me a member of the Cantors. Well, it's not so easy. You have to go through some vetting and see what kind of education you have and testing and so on. I didn't have time for that, frankly. I needed a job for the high holidays and I couldn't wait months to become a member. But he told me I should look at the Yiddish paper in the forwards, and there is an ad by a cantorial representative. He was like an agent, a young guy by the name of Ed Smith. I think he still does it. He was not much older than I was. And I said to him, I'd like a job for the high holidays. So he said to me, come to my home. I came to his home in Brooklyn. He said, sing something. I think I sang one verse of whatever that was. He said, that's enough. And he led me to a position that ended up in Woodmere, Long Island, in a conservative synagogue for the high holidays, where I did the alternate service. There was a chazan there, and we switched from the main service to the alternate service, and that was my first position, and it was pretty well paid. I was very, very pleased. Subsequent to that, my first position, full-time position, after he succeeded in doing that, by the way, he took 10% of the salary that they paid me, which I was happy to give him. And then I said, could you give me a position for the high holiday for a full-time? So he said, well, where would you like to go? I said, I would go anywhere. I'd go to Petsuts, to Kasilivka, any position. I was a single guy. I just needed a good position. So he said, well, there's a position in the Midwest, a city called Dayton, Ohio. I said, okay, Dayton will be fine. And he said to me, so to make, again, a long story short, I auditioned. I was on the train, and I arrived in Dayton from New York, and they had me audition by coming to a Friday night service. And they told me before that I should come on Thursday, because on Thursday, the choir, which was a professional choir, they asked me if I would come Thursday because I would have to sing some of the pieces that the choir knows and what the previous cantor sang. Well, thank God my sight singing was pretty good then. And so I came Thursday, they gave me the music, and I'll never forget, one of the pieces was a nice Ashkivenu, and it starts like this, Ashkivenu, the choir sings, Ashkivenu, and it's a beautiful, beautiful piece that I think that was sung in I believe, either in Temple Emmanuel or Temple Bethel by either one of the Kusevitskis, either David or Moshe Kusevitsky. And I'm trying to think, Zalas, I think was the name of the choir director there who arranged this and so on. Anyway, that was one of the pieces. And I sang some other things that they had me sing, Vishamru. Then Shabbat morning, there was no choir. I sang, there was a big bar mitzvah. I finished davening. Sunday morning, I met with the committee. And they said, we would offer you the job, but the board is not meeting until the following week. But we were very pleased. Would you come next Shabbat as well? So I said, okay, because we have a big bar mitzvah, would you come to the services? But your audition has already taken place. I said, oh, okay. For a brief moment, I thought maybe they wanted to take advantage of me to come and to fill in every Shabbat. But that wasn't the case. After the second Shabbat, the following Sunday, they offered me the job. And in fact, this time, the second Shabbat when I came, they were very generous because they said the first Shabbat, they just paid me for the expenses. Second Shabbat, they gave me a very nice stipend because I came not as auditioning, but for doing a Shabbat service. And I was very pleased. they offered me, and I asked them if they would give me, if they would pay the agent the 10% that I would otherwise have to pay for of the whole year, and they agreed to that. And I served there almost 10 years in that synagogue, and beautifully. I did a lot of things. I had a wonderful big children's choir, but I didn't have to teach bar mitzvahs. There was a Reverend Adler who taught bar mitzvahs. I didn't teach bar mitzvahs. I didn't do any Torah reading. The Shamus, who was a scholar, who taught Talmud, and he taught the bar mitzvah kids. And let's see. And yes, I did the hospital visitations. And I taught a class here and a class there, and it was a very wonderful experience. And of course, the big thing for me is that I met my wife in Dayton. I was the boy next door. I literally lived next door to her home, to the Haber family. 2 beautiful girls, and Louise, who unfortunately passed away, she's a younger sister, and Sandy. It was almost like I could have flipped the coin. I said, whichever is it would be fine. But actually, Sandy had the kind of background, and we liked things together. We liked theater, we liked ballet, we liked music, and so on. And I had a date with her. I asked her to if she would shoot golf balls with me, and so on. Because they made me an honorary member of the Jewish Country Club, the Meadowbrook Country Club, where I learned to play golf. And it started actually. She was hitting with a wood, and I was standing too close behind her, and she hit me with a wood on my right here, on my metzach, and I had a big bomber there. So I like to say that our relationship began with a bang, and I was the boy next door. So that was, and the rest is our history. Thank God we are happily married after all these years. We were married in June 11th of 1961. That's it. So as far as that goes.
So actually, Abe, I want to a beautiful story.
Thank you.
I want to dive down a little into some of the differences of your experience in being a chazan in the UK, where they have, the Blue Book, and they have their, its own history of chazonis and nusach and even liturgy. I'm sure in Jewish college you learned krovos and maravos and all the specific piyutim for the liturgy and different festivals. What was the difference in terms of the liturgy and your experience in Dayton and and then subsequently in Rofei Tzedek, and of just the basic nusach and what sonic distinctions you could make between that experience in the UK and America?
Okay, so I had the one thing that I just can't figure out how that was the case, that in Bayswater Synagogue, of course, the Nusach that all I learned is from Leo Bryll. So I actually learned and davened the Nusach that Leo Bryll had sung there for years earlier. However, if you can believe it, and I cannot believe it, they had a mixed choir. Remember, it was a United Synagogue, it was an Orthodox synagogue. In the very, very back of the synagogue was a mixed choir of men and women. And I can't figure out, I guess it was the kind of a synagogue that had some very old English members who were generations in England. And I think that one of the members was Count, a Jewish lord or count that was a member of that synagogue. But anyway, as you said, I was installed into office by Dr. Israel Brody, was the chief rabbi then in the British Commonwealth. It was called. It wasn't called the United Kingdom. It was still a Commonwealth. But my memories are, I still have the book, a black book with, I wrote all the notes exactly of the main lines that I had to sing. And when I sang En Kamocha and I sang Sulzer, I was responded with a full Sulzer 4-part harmony in that. En Kamocha Elohim Adonai, choir, Ve'en Kemas, etc. So these are some of the memories. I used to wear in that synagogue, in order to go to the hospital to visit, I had to go in as a member of the clergy. and I had what they called a dog's collar. Can you imagine? And other ministers, rabbis, this is what they wore. This was like my business ticket to enter the hospital to visit patients. That is members of the synagogue. I didn't live in that community. I lived in Stoke Newington. However, so I went there and I stayed over on Shabbat overnight in a hotel and did the services Friday night and Shabbat morning. But the experience was quite interesting for me. I learned a lot as I was davening, and I still keep my black booklet with all the musical notes on the sheets of every note that I would sing, because I was nervous, obviously, and I wanted to make sure that everything goes off well. And when they heard that I might be leaving, the Marble Arch Synagogue in London, which was just established and so on, had said to me, they offered me the job as soon as that synagogue was ready for it, which was almost ready. And I didn't even take that position, which would have been a plum position. I was only 18, 19 years old. I wanted to go to America, and that's where I came, and that's where I was. And subsequent to Dayton, Ohio. Okay, you wanted to know
just
earliest.
out. Did everyone else? I'm not sure if that is that just me?
Are we on?
Okay, we're good. No, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
So does that answer your question a little bit anyway?
Well, tell me a little more about the change from Orthodox to conservative. What did that feel like?
I felt very comfortable, interestingly enough, practically from day one when I arrived in New York. As I said, I was in the Chazonim Verband. I went to the Chazonim Verband because I had a letter of introduction from Chazan Jacob Goldstein, who is the father of, what's his name, a member of the Cantors Assembly, Goldstein. And
Israel.
Yes, Israel Goldstein, a very fine Chazan. I had a beautiful letter that he sent me, that he gave me. It was in Yiddish because he had heard me sing in the house of Simon Haas, who is in London, who's a very great, wonderful Chazan. I used to go around, be in his house, and we would kind of stand around. I sit at the piano, would just sing and so on. But anyway.
Oh, he looks great.
Is everything okay?
Yeah, I think we just need to do a little bit of a mute all.
Yeah, I think I saw Mari. Anyway, so that I felt very comfortable going from the Chazonim Verband office to the Cantors Assembly, and I felt absolutely very comfortable. I always had a kind of if you want to say that, a kind of a liberal view, even as I was Chazan there in an Orthodox synagogue. And so there was never any feeling that I need to adjust to anything, to adapt myself. I sank in literally in the position in the conservative synagogue where I did my first high holidays in Woodmere, Long Island, and then in Dayton, Ohio, which was also, of course, the Beth Abraham was a conservative synagogue. And in answer to your question, Matt, no problem at all. And I've been, of course, Chazan in the conservative synagogues ever since. And it was wonderful to. The thing is that what I needed to adapt over the many years was when the style changed. I used to sing with the professional choir Friday night, and pieces by Nomberg, by Sulzer, by Lewandowski, and by the other more East European Chazani compositions, and then. That continued actually all the time, and even at Anshe Emet, I even sang with an organ. And some rabbi saw me on the street in Chicago. He says, "Oh, you're now in the organic synagogue," and I said, "Yes, I'm in an organic synagogue." And of course, my predecessor, Alav Shalom, Mo Silverman, who was there for 45 years or so. So it was intimidating to come to a synagogue like this. But I was called first from Rotvi Tzedek, not to skip there, and I was called from Rotvi Tzedek, where Maurice Goldberg was a chazan, wonderful chazan, And I was called, so I was in the middle of a contract in Dayton, and then they wanted me. And so I asked the synagogue if they would release me from my 5-year contract. So after 2.5 years of the last contract I had in Dayton, I came to Rot Tzedek, where I served for some 19 years. It was wonderful. I served with the great Rabbi Ralph Simon, Alav Shalom, who is the father of Rabbi Matthew Simon, who is the local Rabbi Emeritus here at Bnei Israel, where Rabbi Kival served for many years. So it was a wonderful experience. And then, of course, I came to succeeding me was Abe Mizrahi at Nanshe Emet. I was there just for 3 years, and then I came to Bethel in Bethesda, where they never had a chazan, a full-time, fully schooled chazan. So it was a big thing for them. And I was very happy to come here. So it was a situation where very often they said, well, we never did it this way. And of course, and they didn't say, well, the old chazan did it this different, because there was no old chazan. But the way the people who were davening, there was a lawyer who was a chazan there, there was a teacher, and so on. So this was the first thing. And they had to quadruple their budget for music when I came. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had parnasa. And I was there in Bethel. And it was very wonderful. I had to adapt myself. There was no choir. There was, of course, I'm trying to think. They used to have a choir on late Friday night services, but when I came, they didn't. And I founded a group that I called them, how did I call it? Well,
Avachir.
Avachir, you know it. And then there was a children's choir. It's called Shir Atid. And they still have a group of volunteers, Avachir. And it was a wonderful experience. And it was time to retire. I retired in 2011. And then I wanted to make sure that the synagogue would engage a chazan, not somebody who can play the guitar and have a nice little voice and sing the Hebrew from transliteration. I wanted somebody to succeed me that I would feel very happy, and I think that I believe that the Bethel in Bethesda deserved. To make a long story short again, I sent a letter as well as an article that I wrote many years ago about the Chazan and so forth, made sure that every member of the Cantorial Search Committee received that. And recently, actually, one of those members showed me a copy of that letter, and that influenced him how to vote. And then I said to them, look, I'd like Bethel to have a cantor who is well-schooled in the cantorial school, whether it's at the theological seminary or at the Hebrew Union College. And also, if possible, if that person is a member of the Cantors Assembly. Guess what? I ended up with you, Matt, a schooled person, an educated chazan, an innovative chazan, a beautiful voice, and so on. So it made my heart feel so good that after all those years earlier before I came, they never had a chazan at all. Suddenly they end up with Abe Lubin and with Matt, and also when Matt decided with his dear wife as a rabbi to serve jointly at Bethel in Akron, another time, this time they knew who I thought Bethel should have. Somebody is a graduate of the Cantors Assembly, as a member of the Cantors Assembly, a graduate of the Cantorial School of the Cantors Institute, or the H.L. Miller Cantorial School. Guess what? They got another wonderful chazan, and his name was the present chazan, Asa Fredkin, and also does wonderful things, meditation services, and so forth. As for myself, over the years, congregational singing, I adapted myself to that, and always snuck in. I always try to sneak in chazonas, even as the congregational sing, between and betwixt. I made sure that chazonas is never lost, and I've done that over the years to try to adapt myself and adopt whatever was more of the currency, of the inyana de yoma, so to speak. And I am glad I did that, because this is, as I'm looking at the future, if that's going to be your first next question, I think a chazan today, first of all, should be extremely well schooled. He should be on the beam as somebody who is a yodea sefer, and he should teach and continue to study, and also to find opportunities to teach even what he's doing in Chazanut as a Chazan. You can always teach better off the bima sometimes when you have a classroom, to expose them to what classic Chazanut was and what it is right now, and what the present Chazan has to consider and to recognize that the olam, that the congregation, that the members of the congregation today, the Jews in the pews, are not the same that they were 50 and 100 years ago, where they knew the nusach, they understood it, and they related to that. So I say to you, there will be a position for a Chazan in a synagogue that recognizes that the Chazan today adds so much more than simply singing a Hashkivenu on Friday night on the bima. It's somebody who can be a kol bo in a larger sense of that term. A kol bo meaning doing all kinds of things off the bima as much as doing great stuff on the bima. And to work out a good shaklavitaria, a good discussion with the rabbi, and to make sure that they are all on the same page. Obviously, there are always differences of opinion about this or that, but I think to work towards that, and finally I say to myself, try to be true to your profession, try to be, that the word emet should always be your point of reference, not only as a chazan, but in life in general. And that's what is my focus. And I'm looking at a lot of, you mentioned before about women, and I'm very proud of the fact, because we've got so many women today, chazanim, who do great work, who are very skilled, who bring a whole other dimension and an emotional feeling that men don't have exactly the same as women. And it was at first contentious. It didn't get a majority in the convention, a couple of conventions. And I was designated as the proponent for women cantors. We got a majority at the convention, but not a 2/3 majority, which at that time, Sam Rosenbaum, alav shalom, the executive vice president, said we need, for an issue like this, we need 2/3 majority. And what he said went at those days. And finally it came to the executive council, and that's where we met and we decided, and women have served ever since. And this theological seminary, I think they accepted women for the rabbinical school, and soon after the cantorial school accepted women, but they had to make a statement that they will abide by all the restrictions of halakha and so on. And I'm so proud. Got many women chazanim friends, in addition to all the men friends chazanim. So that tells you a little bit of this. Are you there? I see somebody's phone is on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Did we?
Yes, we can hear you. We seem to have lost Matt.
Oh no. Where did Matt go?
Matt? Let's find him.
Yes, let's find him.
He'll probably put in a chat where he is. What happened?
Well, yeah, he would certainly pop up.
Or email somebody.
Well, in the meantime, maybe this is a good opportunity, Geraldine, to open up for some questions.
Sure. So many things have come up. I'd like to ask something as a non-Chazan, non-Cantor. it's all very well for the cantors to do the right thing and be the right thing. How do we make the synagogues want the cantors and employ them?
Very good question. Always bothered me that a congregation would find funds to engage a second rabbi, but not a first chazan, a chazan at all. I think it's several things we can do. First of all, the Cantors Assembly, the official body of the chazanim, the officers and others who would find opportunities to speak to officers and presidents of congregations the kind of things that they are missing by not having a chazan. It's an educational process. The chazan in a position should do everything he or she can to educate the membership and by illustration, as to how important that person is. And they will say, oh, we wouldn't be able to live without a chazan. Look what this chazan is doing here, from A to Z and everything in between. So I think education is important. Another thing is, while a chazan is in a position to find opportunities to educate those people in the classroom, and they in turn share that information with other people, yes, and to tell them of the history of the chazan, teach a course about it, why it's important, why the nuances of the liturgy is so important, and how the chazan can enhance and expand what any congregation offers. So I think it's education and influencing those who are in a position to decide to engage a chazan or not. And maybe I know that the Cantors Assembly has a program where a chazan goes to a congregation that don't have a chazan to offer them a Shabbat and a Sunday and illustrate what that person would do if they decide to have a chazan, to be an ambassador. We have an ambassador program, and I think that we should do more of that and make sure that any synagogue where the chazan retires, that synagogue will have been served by a chazan, as was in my case. I can only speak for myself, where I served for the 21 years before I retired. And then it was the natural thing, it seems, that they would engage somebody like Matt Austerklein, and following him, Chazan Asa Fredkin. So that seemed to have worked in my case. And I believe that what I'm saying should have an impact on other shuls to take that as an example.
I'm sorry, Abe, I got cut off, but now I'm back.
I missed your face.
That's okay. My podium is back. I appreciate. Thank you, Geraldine, for opening things back up. I have so many more questions. The last one I wanted to ask that is very particular to you, more than almost. There's a handful of chazanim who have done things the way you have done them, and that is that you have gone to five different graduate programs and college programs over the course of your life, getting a master's degree, almost getting a PhD at Chicago. Throughout your pulpit career, you've had a thirst for knowledge. How have you been able to, what was it like making time for that? Tell me about, I know that when you were in Dayton, you were able to go down to the Birnbaum Collection, HUC regularly. How did you balance your passion for scholarship and what you had to offer as a thinker and writer with the regular duties of the pulpit cantorate? Did you get pushback? Tell me about the life as a scholar cantor throughout your career.
Okay, well, when I'm actually starting already when I was in London, I used to eat up every book of Chazanas books of Jewish music and liturgy that I could grab hold of. So I would order books from New York when I was in London, and I even and I can't remember the name of that book of recitatives. I purchased a book published in Istanbul, Constantinople. There was a cantor there. Somebody might be able to remind me what that was. I still have the old volume.
Was that Shapoznik?
Yes, a Pashnik. So he was in an Ashkenazic shul in very good Istanbul, and I wrote to him, and he sent me the book, whatever I paid him for it, and all kind of other books and recitatives that I bought, and I purchased a lot of stuff that I sent to New York. And okay, so I was always interested in study. I went to the London College of Music for and one thing that I wanted to, once I decided that this is, by the way, if you ask me, people ask me, when did you decide to become a chazan? When did you decide to have the career? And it wasn't a career choice. It was something that was in my soul. There was nothing else I could do. You know, my older brother was a lawyer. My older sister is a lawyer, is an educator. My two other siblings are lawyers, and I was the only poor chazan. But I was always, it was in my soul. That was the only thing that I could say. What else would I do other than being a chazan, right? So one thing I knew, that if that's what I want to do, I want to be able to sing from a sheet that my sight singing should be good. And I noticed in the musical Times in London, there was an advertisement that somebody could teach me in a very short time. So I took a bus and a train to this person's room, and I learned the tonic solfa. Thus, I was able to do my first audition in Dayton, just take the sheet and sing, write the score from there. That helped me. So, and then when I was in Dayton, I used to go to Cincinnati and to Hebrew Union College, the Birnbaum collection, as I said. I used to make copies of that. I was interested in the Birnbaum collection, which was a tremendous collection, and made copies of some interesting pages. And I always would go in the morning. I would go into Cincinnati. I would study also the College Conservatory of Music. I would go to, and I dedicated 1 or 2 days. Sometimes I had to come in first with my little Renault, go in, and there was a funeral in the afternoon. So I drove back to Dayton. It was an hour's drive, and then I went back to Cincinnati. So this is the way I was kind of working it out to be able to do everything. But I didn't have to teach bar mitzvahs, b'nai mitzvah. I did a lot of the other things, the hospital visitation and so on, chazan and the choirs and children's choir. But my day was more available than maybe Sunday mornings and evenings for meetings and so forth. So I managed it, and as I look back, it was worth doing it, and I'm glad. And I know, Matt, you are trying to figure out how to be a full-time chazan, a full-time husband, a full-time father, and go to Oxford and do your study. I'm just so proud of you, Matt, and I'm so glad that you succeeded me, and whatever you learned from me, then that be it. I'm very happy about that.
Possible to ask a question?
Oh yes, and
yes,
go ahead. My
Jerry,
good
I'll
friend.
let you. I'm Jerry Glantz. I want to let you have your question. I just, as we come to the end, I just want to close out the. This is going to be open for another 15 minutes for open questions
Sure.
to Chazan Lubin. I again want to thank Geraldine and Austerklein and Dr. Kligman and Dr. Black for helping this conversation on Zoom to come together. I believe we have them weekly through July 21st at least. There's a schedule that comes out, and if you're interested, you can email any one of us if you don't get the regular email, as all part of the International Forum for Jewish Music Studies. So that's a wonderful thing. And we thank Cantor Lubin for him sharing his story, which is such a beautiful one. And he's such
Let me just add.
Menschy guy. And I want to open it up for questions, starting with Dr. Jerry Glantz, who's the son of the famed Cantor Abe Glantz.
I'm glad Jerry came on. Jerry, go ahead. The son of one of the great chazanim of all times. Go ahead, Jerry.
Cantor Lubin, thank you so much. It was so inspiring to hear you. What I wanted to ask you was, which cantors in your career, which cantors influenced your chazanut? And I understand from talking with you earlier that you had some special connection and influence from my father, Leib Glantz, so I'd like to hear about that.
Jerry, you had a father that was really, to me, if somebody would ask me, which chazan of all times certainly of the 20th century. I'm not familiar with how Stilzer sang and how some of the other Chazanim of that century or earlier. But after being exposed to people like Kusevitsky, Pinchik, Rosenblatt, Warten, and so on, I was introduced to Leibglanz a little later in my career when I was a little older, and I just fell in love with the creativity and the newness and the approach to Chazanut that Leibglanz influenced me. Thus, when I have been improvising, Glanz was in the back of my mind. Before every high holidays, I would sit in my room, listen to a Slichat service by the great Leibler Glanz. And even though I would never be able to even imitate, try, I would take something from there because he was innovative, creative, like no other Chazan ever that I can think of. And so a tribute that you have been involved, Jerry, to print and to and make available all the recordings and add books, etc., histories and so on about your father, which I possess all of them, and I never get tired. I was once asked to do a Mariv here and a Mariv there. Somebody once asked me to do a Mariv in the style of Glanz. So I try to do it in the style Glanz of what I knew. And I would not sing Leib Glanz, but sing in his style, which was always dramatic and evocative, and every word was sacred to Leib Glanz, and that's the way he sang. Perush Hamilim, always to look at the word and know what that word says behind the word, and that's the way he davened. So Jerry, what you have been doing all your life and will continue forever is to make your father's music available to the entire world, and I know that you've gone beyond that. You had it orchestrated with concerts in Russia, etc. You can find out all about that by writing to Jerry. So Jerry, kol hakavod, kibud av va'im, and your kibud av is you're going to be rewarded for that. That's my answer about Glanz.
All right, now we'll open for more questions. And I don't know if Lori, if any questions had come to you during the talk, if there was ones that you wanted to share, or we can continue.
There were only two that came in during the conversation, one of which was actually answered quite directly, and that was related to any difficulty that arose between the move from Orthodox to conservative. And then the other question that came up was one related to what Nusach was taught, this is from Jeffrey Goldberg, what Nusach was taught at Jews College for Erev Shabbat, is that correct? Western or Eastern European, and what was sung in London at this time?
The basic classic East European Nusach was what we were taught, and which we're all familiar with. There were certain things that I used to do in London that we hardly do here. For example, for Shavuot, which we just celebrated, in addition to the Hakdamas, the Hakdamut, we also sang before the Haftarah, the Yetziv Pidgam, which he taught us. Yetziv Pidgam, etc. And also, I would remember singing Ma'aravis, the evening service of a Yontif. I would sing Ma'aravis, those piyutim that are interspersed inside after each of the brachot and so on, which I don't think we do nowadays here. Those are things that I miss doing, and some other brach dodi and some other things, other piyutim. And of course, I did it from a classic traditional machzor for the high holidays, for example, which had many more things that we did with the choir and otherwise.
We have another question here from Alex Klein, wondering if you brought the Blue Book with you to the U.S.
Yes, I did. I still own it, Alex. I have the Blue Book, which was the book that we used with all the classic things that were there by Mombach, for example, was one of the composers, and we did other things, the Hallelujah here and there. but this was like the book that everybody referred to. Called it the blue book simply because the covers were in blue, but and I'm glad I belong to a don't want to get political, blue rather than red. Go ahead.
Abe, I want to ask you another question. One of the things in your library when I was getting to look through it, that was, I don't know if you know how you got it. I mean, it's just a lot of amazing things there. One was a Naumburg signed by Naumburg that he had given to his editor who was in Strasbourg. So I don't know if you remember how you came across some of these like books like this that were.
Well, I was always a book collector, and as I told you, I love to do that. I don't think that at the time I even realized the value of a book like this that has Naumburg's, signature, autograph. But I don't remember. I always would go to places where I might find something. And so that's when I bought it, and I didn't realize at the time. And I think you, Matt, realized that what was the signature there of Naumburg, and so it's valuable. Keep it for the rest of the life you like, and I'm glad. I'm also
well, you had realized it because there was actually a little note in there.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, I like with someone did a French translation for you at some point.
Yes.
So it's if someone has time to get another PhD to do a study of Abe's library, which I have part of. No, because it's got really amazing, interesting things in it. Not just lots of old chazonists and books about Jewish college and research stuff, but just these little these little gems and scans of things from Hebrew Union College. It's just an amazing. It's like I feel like Abe is like the David Oppenheim of cantorial libraries.
Well, thank you very much. And Matt, I'm so grateful to you that you looked at all the stacks in the synagogue, and so I couldn't schlep everything because I live in an apartment now and so on. And I'm so glad that a lot of those things are in your hands, and also stuff that's at the USC LA with the Klickman, I think, is in charge of with the Milken school there. So I'm glad it's in good hands. And I'm still wondering what I should do with a lot of my recordings and so on. I got an invitation from Chaim Wiener, who's got all the videos from all the concerts and so on, and he asked me to send him. And I've got any number of videos of concerts that I did. I'm going to send him DVDs and videos, and he said he would be glad to kind of arrange them so that he would be able to send it out. He said he's got several thousand subscribers who like to have stuff from him. So I'm going to send him some of those things. I remember doing concerts in Los Angeles and where they recorded all of that, and at Nate Lamb's synagogue, and of course in Jerusalem. I just finished having a nice talk with Naftali Hershtig, and we discussed a lot of nice things. And then I received from Chaim Wiener in Florida, and he said to me, listen to this. He says, you did a beautiful Sheibana Beis Hamikdash, and you sang with Naftali Hershtig. And I listened to me, and it wasn't too shabby.
We have a few more questions coming in.
Yeah. Oh, I want one last book question for Abe.
Oh, sure.
Which is, do you still have that black book?
Yes.
You still have that black book?
Hold on a minute.
No, you're.
1 second.
I didn't mean to make him go get it, but that's okay. It's a fascinating thing, like the black book of Leopold Snusa from 1950s. It's really
Hello?
cool.
Hello?
Yes, 1 second.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I wanted to try to look at to show it to you, but yes, I do have that little black book where I have my notes of what I sang for my service at Bayswater Synagogue. I wanted to be sure that I don't miss anything. So I do still have that black book. So one was the blue book that was published, and mine was the black book, was about my own book where I wrote all my notes to do the services at Bayswater Synagogue.
Very good. And Laura, I think you were going to say we have two questions from the chat.
We have a few more questions coming in. First, coming from Malcolm Miller. To what extent do you introduce modern influences from Israeli folk musicals, opera, or commission new music, or compose yourself?
I've written a number of things that was also published in the Zamrulo publication of the Cantors Assembly. To what extent I do introduce congregational melodies, whether the Karlebach's nigunim or Debbie Friedman, Alea Shalom, things like that. And I usually, and I also occasionally will introduce a melody that would come to me that I would just sing as a congregational melody. It was not necessarily written initially, but sing it a few times so that the congregation would sing along with me. But otherwise, over my career, I always try to adapt myself to the needs of the day, the Inyane de Yoma. Because if you stay in the old and not realize what a Chazan today has to be, then I'm afraid it's not going to go well for you. So you have to be, as I've already said without repeating myself, you have to be a cold bow. And I don't mean a cold bow just being a shochet, a moel, and a chazan, but a cold bow doing everything that you're capable of doing. And if you have special skills in any area, offer it to the congregation, and they will then begin to appreciate you. So to adapt yourself, as we have to do in life, to adjust ourselves, so that you should be able to use a computer, which some of my other friends maybe have still recognized. So at least I know where to press, where to push the buttons. And you have to know how to push the buttons.
Hello?
Did you want to ask a question, Chaim?
Yes, I'm from Yan Yerushalayim. I'd like to ask a question to Abraham Lubin.
Yeah, what?
I'd like to ask a question to you, please. I'm a son of a chazan, a family of chazonim. My father was Chazan Lerman. He was in a Rivlin choir. Ring a bell?
What was his name again? The last name?
Lerman.
Lerman, yes. The name sounds familiar.
Yes, and a family of Chazan. I want to ask you a question. Where did you learn Chazanut from?
Well, some of it I just knew innately myself from listening, and then my formal Chazanut was, of course, my earliest was listening and singing with Zalman Rivlin in Jerusalem. But then when I was a Jew, Shirat Israel, you know of that. I don't know if it's still in existence by anybody who succeeded the Zalman Rivlin. By the way, interesting about Zalman Rivlin, there is this folk saying. They used to say in Yiddish that Chazan is an acronym for Chazonim, Zainin, Naronim. Chazonims are fools, and he used to say, Chazan spells the following: Chazonim. He said yes about that folk saying. He used to say Chazonim spells Chutz Zalmen Nisht.
Did you give any concert with famous Chazonim, like in any famous Chazonim, like in Israel?
Yes, in Israel I did with the Naftali Hirschtig and the Chazan that succeeded him in Heichal Shlomo. I don't know his name. I don't remember his name. And I did concerts there. I did a concert in Haifa with Tzvi Aharoni, Olav Shalom, who was a wonderful, great chazan.
There was a famous chazan in South Africa, a chazan Johnny Gluck.
Yes, I did not know him, but he was unfortunately passed away too young, right? Yes. I was very good friend of Simon Haas in London. Shimon Haas. And
my father learned by a chazan in Haifa, Yitzchak, I forgot the name. In the big city of Haifa.
Haman.
Aha.
Sorry? Chazan Man.
Yes, Man.
Yes.
All right.
Scare. כל הכבוד.
Okay, we have I think one last question here. This is coming from Rachel Adelstein, and I'm actually going to tag mine onto it as well because I have an interest here. She writes, what do you think is the best way to learn to be a chazan in England? And I would throw out as part of that question, what role at this point in time, so much of learning chazanut was, at least in the past, was about listening to the greats and imitation and then improvising and making it your own. And now so much of what we do is just a lot of it is based on actual print and some of listening to the greats and going in a few different directions. And I'm curious, what's your ratio for how that should work now?
Okay, well, I've always, and as many years as I can remember, improvisation at the point of singing a particular liturgy was a big part of me. If I sang with a choir, of course, we rehearsed and we did something that was published and so forth. And if I sing a congregational melody that the congregation knows and so on. But to this day, I have always improvised. I loved just to look at the text and to start, whether it is Ata Hivdalta or parts of the Unetane Tokev or any of the pieces of the liturgies. I looked at the words and I tried to lose myself in the text and improvise based on my understanding, on my emotional response to a particular word or particular phrase. And if the word, for example, I'll never forget that I did a concert in Jerusalem and I sang Rosenblatt's Rachem No, and where the word Yerushalayim came to my word, even as I sang it many, many times, something came to me that expressed that word perhaps differently and evocative than otherwise. Because, as I said before about Leib Glanz, the milim of the understanding, as they would say Perush Hamilas, or it's a Perush Hamilim, I think is more correct, of the understanding of the words. So improvisation is any chazan who is not able to improvise, I think loses a big important piece of the moment when he davens that would come out, that's of the moment. And that is, I think, one of the most important things. And that's why for the rest of my life, that is the way I will daven. And I still do high holiday services. But this year I will not be able to do it, but only virtually in a synagogue in Cincinnati, which I've done for the last 8 years. And I'll keep doing it as long as I can. And always with improvisation. And that is the important part of me.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chazan Lubin. We're reaching a little past our time boundary, and I want to say thank you to everyone who stayed on the call for so long and for really just sharing your story and your experience and your menschlichkeit. In one of my books that I research on early modern Chazanim, one of the cantors writes, instead of Chazanim Zayin Naranim, Chazan Zariz Nischar. That a chazan is their payment is to do mitzvahs, and that's why Abe is such a great chazan. Actually, he's such a great improviser, but he does so many mitzvahs and such a caring person, and so that should be inspiring for all of us. And
Ellie, it's nice to see you. Ellie Schleifer, I see you.
Thank you, everyone, for being on the call.
Thank you.
We'll be back with something next week. Thank you, Geraldine and Lori and Dr. and Mark.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Abe Lubin. I think we've had a wonderful introduction and been able to hear so much of your wonderful career. It's really, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. These conversations can stimulate so much, and it's really wonderful to see Eli Schleifer here again, who gave us a wonderful conversation last week with Naomi Konzentner. I would like to thank everybody who's offered conversations, and to tell you that next week, Professor Johannes Hirschberg is going to be talking to and about the composer Tzvi Avni. Yehoash, are you there? Do you want to say something about what you're going to do next week? Are you still there, Yehoash? If so, you could say something. He's been here. But otherwise, we look forward to that. The following week, Tuesday, every Tuesday, it's the same time, we have Jeremiah Lockwood, PhD candidate at Stanford University, graduate school, accomplished radical Jewish musician, in dialogue with Hankus Netsky, multi-instrumentalist, composer, teacher, scholar, founder of the Klezmer Conservatory Band. On the 21st of July, Malcolm Miller will be talking to Malcolm Singer. We're thinking of doing it in the last Tuesday of the month, what we've just been introduced to as speed scholarship, like speed dating, where maybe 10 people can do 6 minutes about what they're doing and maybe ask questions, so that we get many more people involved, and we could choose a theme. And if anybody's got a theme they'd like to see dealt with on the 28th of July, then please email me. And please don't forget to fill in this form with your email address, because that's going to be the best way of contacting you.
Geraldine, I wanted to just say hi to a cousin of mine. I think she is, are you there, Adrienne Greenbaum? My cousin.
I'm still here.
Okay, anyway, wonderful, one of the great flautists. Thank you.
Good. Does anybody else want to say something? Because, you know, this is our opportunity. We're all in the room together. We're happy for you to talk to each other.
I did want to say that while Abe was saying about how he introduces newness, I've always been struck by his manner when he's introducing a nigun that no one has in the congregation had ever sung before. And it was so inviting, and I missed that with other chazans that I've performed with. There's a need for a connection when you're singing with the congregation and wanting them to respond with you. There's a specialness about that Abe has always brought, and I wish others would do the same.
Thank you.
Can I say something, Geraldine?
Go on.
Because just as much as everybody we'd like everybody to join your side of the academic side of the wing of the ECA. Anybody who is also interested in joining the ECA for the ECA should send emails to myself, and we'll be put on the mailing list, and they can receive the letters and newsletters and things that we're doing, and notifications of other things that we will be doing in the future.
Alex, I'll certainly pass on. ECA, by the way, is the European Cantors Association, which was started in the UK in 2012 and runs conventions and is very interested particularly in the plight of the cantor coming up to Rosh Hashanah this year. How are we going to manage when you've got 30 people in a congregation and they shouldn't sing? So if anybody wants to talk on that subject, the people would be interested to hear.
Geraldine, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Jerry Clant. I'd like to propose to offer a program about the night concert that Cantor Lubin was mentioning. We just had our last concert in Hanover, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested, I would be happy to present some of the music and tell about the whole project, which is going around the world now in different countries, in different languages. And it's an amazing concert which is connecting our history of the Holocaust, and the motif of the concert is a stand against hate, which is very, very relevant to today. So if you're interested, I'll be happy to present that program.
We'll certainly see when a suitable date would be, Jerry. That would be wonderful.
I would commend that. Anything that has to do with Leib Glantz, I go for it.
It would be wonderful. I was at the concert in Hanover. It was very impressive. Very, very good. Malcolm, do you want to say something about your talk with Malcolm Singer? Malcolm Miller, do you want to say something?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you, first of all, to everyone who's participated so far in these conversations. They're really wonderful, sharing this personal insight into topics which, you know, we can be studying, but actually to hear from somebody who's living the art of Chazanut is really fascinating. And my conversation will probably be slightly different aspects, but touching on the same things. Malcolm Singer, who's well known as a composer in the general concert sphere, has also written many settings of Hebrew text, psalms, and actually sort of pioneered in a way writing in Britain for very well-known secular ensembles who sing in Hebrew. And he's also written synagogue music, and he also conducts or has conducted choirs for Jewish music. So he has a very interesting and broad scope, and he's internationally recognized. So I thought it would be interesting to explore some of the aspects of text settings, Hebrew settings, and synagogue versus concert hall, and these sort of themes which might interest both synagogue musicians and other Jewish music scholars. So that's what we'll be doing on the 21st of July. Hope you could be there. Thanks, Gerald.
Good. We look forward to seeing you. Does anybody else like to say anything before we close the room? Ellie Schleifer.
I hope I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to thank Cantor Abe Lubin for this wonderful presentation of his own career and life. And I met Cantor Lubin in Chicago, where he was Cantor of Rodef Tzedek, and I enjoyed him, enjoyed his singing there very much, and certainly after that he continued with a very rich career. But I want to mention that we shared the same Rebbe at the beginning, and that is Reb Zalman Rivlin. I was also a singer in the choir of Zalman Rivlin. I studied Chazanut with him, and he was indeed a very clever Chazan, very with lots of sense of humor, as you mentioned, Leib. And I want to mention that he also was an innovative Chazan, especially when it came to introducing congregational singing in the midst of Chazonic recitatives. He was very, very particular about that. He really fought for that kind of concept. And last week, I was able to demonstrate a piece, Ata Zocher Maaseh Olam, from Zichronot, in the way he believed that the Chazanut, in order to really be part of the congregational art of singing, should combine recitatives and rhythmical, metrical pieces in such a way that it would never bore the congregation. So again, thank you, Abe, and good continuation to you.
Tודה רבה. So you were with Shirat Israel as well, huh? Very interesting.
Yeah, of course, yeah. for a good number of years. I was also the choir conductor there.
Okay, all right. Eli is a great scholar, and I always admired his continuation of his studies all the way with a doctoral degree from the University of Chicago and a scholar of Jewish music. And are you still the dean of the Cantor School in the HUC in Jerusalem?
No, I've retired there, but I still teach a class on history of Jewish music.
Beautiful. Thank you. The next time when I'm in Israel, we'll have to make a date over lunch when we are able to fly and be there, and we should still be well and alive. Okay, except that we'll wait until this Corona thing is out of the place.
Amen.
Very good, very good. Well, it's wonderful to have had so many really distinguished people with us, and also young people, because this forum is not just for absolutely scholars who have done everything. What was lovely about today was to have the young scholar talking to his mentor, and this is how we pass down the information, and we all learn from each other. So thank you again very much. Thank you to Laurie for managing this process. We look forward to seeing you all next week and enjoying conversations that cover a wide range of Jewish music. So thank you to everybody who's been there. Thank you, Abe, and thank you, everybody. Okay.
Thank you, Geraldine.
So see you next week.
Okay.
And if you haven't signed sent your email address, please do.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.